title of today's message is well, I'm not going to tell you actually. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to have you guess at the end. You know, it's rare, if ever, to hear this question asked. What are your values? What are your values? What are your values? You don't hear that in job interviews. You'll hear, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you think you can contribute to this company? But not, what are your values? I went to a Christian college. They did begin to touch on what my spiritual values were, but I would say most colleges, they're not going to ask you what your values are. They just don't ask that on college applications these days. And it's almost never asked. Can you think of where it's asked? I think it's almost like a riddle. If your life existence was dependent on the answer, what would your greatest values be? And I think we have a contestant for this, someone that's gone before us. This is found Luke 12, 16 to 21, and I'm going to read it. Luke 12, 16 to 21. A wealthy landowner had a farm that produced bumper crops. In fact, it filled his barns to overflowing. He thought, what should I do now that every barn is full and I have nowhere else to store more? I know what I'll do. I'll tear down the barns and build one massive barn that will hold all my grain and goods. Then I can just sit back, surrounded with comfort and ease. I'll enjoy life with no worries at all. God said to him, what a fool you are to trust in your riches and not me. This very night, the messengers of death are demanding to take your life. Then who will get all the wealth you stored up for yourself? This is what will happen to all those who fill up their lives with everything but God. So that's contestant number one with that question, that riddle. What translation are you using? That was the Passion Translation. All right, contestant number two, Mark 8, 36 to 38, also from the Passion Translation. Jesus is also speaking of contestant number two. For what use is it to gain all the wealth and power, I'm going to emphasize power, of this world with everything it could offer you at the cost of your own life? And what could be more valuable to you than your own soul? So among the unfaithful and sinful people living today, if you're ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of you when he makes his appearance with his holy messengers in the glorious splendor of his Father. So that's the second contestant. You know, it kind of reminds me of a vivid scene. You guys remember seeing the Titanic? You know, the more recent one. I mean, it would be in the old one too, where the ship is tilting, and I know some of the studies are showing it might not have been exactly how it happened. The ship is tilting, and you have rich and poor alike scurrying. They sense their death is imminent, but they're scurrying, and there really is no difference between the wealthy and the common person. And yet the wealthy, in some cases, kind of push through in their self-importance to see if they could save their own lives. But really, with impending death, there is no advantage to being rich or well-connected. But in the middle of this, Jesus wonderfully describes a treasure found by those who are clearly looking for these eternal values. And I would like to read this. A person discovered that there was a hidden treasure in a field. Upon finding it, he hid it again. Because of uncovering such treasure, he was overjoyed and sold all that he possessed to buy the entire field so he could have the treasure. This is Matthew 13:44. Heaven's kingdom realm is also like a jewel merchant in search of rare pearls. When he discovered one very precious and exquisite pearl, he immediately gave up all he had in exchange for it. Now there's an example of value, if you will. You know, in a phrase, I guess, it is, the kingdom of God really is the greatest value. There's an answer for you. You know, I don't want to overgeneralize, and you know, I can be prone to maybe be overly dramatic, but here are my observations. Most people have everyday values that they live by. Most people have everyday values that they live by, and also eternal values that they'll discuss and are getting ready to use when they enter into eternity. Everyday values to live by, eternal values that they'll discuss as they talk about eternity to come. So it's now and later values. That's what I've observed. Here are a couple statements, and some of these I've heard directly, but you've heard this first one. If it feels good or right, you should do it. If it feels good or right, you should do it. Here's one I heard a couple years ago. It's only wrong if you get caught. It's only wrong if you get caught. Here's one. Life is lived by impulses and emotions, not so much by values. Life is lived by impulses and emotions, not so much by values. Finally, the last one. You know, man, everything is relative. Everything is relative. What's your truth? I'll tell you my truth. It's all relative. Remember last week we saw Merriam's dictionary and definition of values, the importance, worth, and usefulness of something, a value. A person's principles or standard of behavior. It's a value. You can be sure that when the disciples left their jobs, left their families, they were now tuned in to Jesus' values. A whole new world. Jesus liked to be around people, especially those at the lower end. That was a value Jesus had. They tuned into that. It didn't matter if they were a Samaritan. It doesn't matter if they were leprous. In fact, he literally embraced those disabled and those that were condemned. The lady was caught in adultery, like I said, the leprous. And another value Jesus had, he kept referring to his Father and his kingdom. My Father and this kingdom of heaven, this kingdom of God. And you know, I think before long the disciples probably realized, you know what? Every value I have is contradictory to the value Jesus has. Every thing that I hold dear, Jesus is telling me, that's not how I'm operating here. And so his values were different from their values. And Jesus was, in fact, talking about a different culture entirely. That's the whole point. But always, always based on huge, encompassing, eternal values. That's how it was different. In contrast with temporary, earthly values. Eternal values as the umbrella and superior to temporary, earthly values. That was the reality. Like giving money, the value of money, far less than the faith in God, who's our supplier. Two existing kingdoms, we touched on that. Earth's kingdom, heaven's kingdom. Allegiance to God through Christ first, before allegiance to anything else, even family. And today we have the backdrop of COVID-19, a world plague. We also have the backdrop of election 2020, with personalities, conversations, behaviors so intense that most will say, I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to go there. You know, the truth is, I don't either. But I've observed something. Politics, personalities, intense emotions, protests, riots are far, 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 far from the main issue.
Yes.
They are, in essence, a distraction and a smokescreen. For you see, values are actually very important to some people in our society. Those who would lead us in government. And I say, why is that? The people who want to be civil servants and lead, whether it's a local level or the national level, why is it that they're so interested in and care about values?